Episode 376. Will Debbie survive? Debbie was overcome with the feeling of her bones freezing within her own body. Tyson's attack was painful and cruel. Watching her misery, Jessup wished he was being punished instead of her. It seemed too cruel that such a young woman had to endure such pain. He approached her and said in a tender voice, "Debbie, how do you feel?" She began to smile but said kindly, "Grandpa, please don't worry about me." But her hands shook as she spoke. Jessup yelled at everyone in the room to help. Other members of the Clifton family quickly offered towels, warm blankets, and hot drinks. Some even offered to massage her limbs to try to ease the warmth back into them. But no matter what anyone did, Tyson's internal force worked through her, keeping her cold and miserable. "Father, this might be beyond us. Maybe we should take her to the hospital," Rufus said in a worried tone. He was worried for Debbie, of course, but he also feared for Jessup's health. He was only just recovering from the bombings at the Clifton's business buildings. The stress of watching his granddaughter suffer might negatively impact his health. Jessup sighed. "We have no choice. I'll take her to the hospital. Rufus, you need to get Alex to come back from the Moon Palace." Rufus didn't even stop to change his clothes or eat. He gathered a few guards and drove out of the Clifton estate as quickly as he could. At the hospital, a silver-haired doctor inspected Debbie while her family watched on in worry. One of the family members said, "Dr. Howard is the best doctor in Baltimore. He should be able to figure out what to do about her condition." Jessup furrowed his brow and said nothing, waiting as calmly as he could for the doctor's conclusion. After a long time, Dr. Howard put down his stethoscope and sighed. "Mr. Clifton," he said, "the patient's condition is critical. This is a strange disease. I don't understand what's happening in her body. It's as if a kind of coldness is generating from within her, and it's getting worse and worse. If this continues, I'm afraid she won't make it." Jessup's face remained closed and neutral. "Is there nothing we can do?" "Nothing at present. This is an extremely rare case," said Dr. Howard. He was very sympathetic to Debbie's condition. He thought it was cruel that such a deadly mystery was ruining the health of such a young person. "There's no end to this war," Jessup muttered. "But I'll fight. I'll fight the Blood Brothers with everything I have left." Tyson's face and voice haunted him. He couldn't get the mental image of this sneer out of his mind. It was clear to him that Tyson genuinely thought that normal people were less than human, just bugs to be squashed under his feet. Jessup sat by Debbie's bed, lost in these thoughts. At last, Dr. Howard gently bade him farewell and left him to his thoughts. Jessup watched Debbie's labored breathing. He was filled with grief. He had only just gotten his granddaughter back some months ago, and now he was losing her again. Behind him, the other family members agreed that Alex needed to be brought to the hospital as quickly as possible. They feared he would not make it back in time to say goodbye to Debbie. Alex had no idea something horrible had happened at home. Since his return to the Moon Palace, several members of the Appalachian Alliance had come to visit him. The palace was filled with an air of celebration. Still, his thoughts were often with Debbie, and he missed her a great deal. Suddenly, someone told him that there was an old woman outside who wished to speak with him. After he nodded, the old woman soon hobbled in. She was very short. She looked up at him and said, "I've come to see the new lord and the leader of this new alliance." Although her words were perfectly polite, her voice had a rather arrogant lilt. She looked humble, but she didn't seem to have much respect for him. Nevertheless, Alex stepped forward to greet her. When he drew close, he noticed her face was covered with pockmarks. Her eyes also seemed listless and misty. She was blind. "Please sit down," he said, and a disciple of the palace quickly came forward with a stool for the old woman. The disciple whispered to him quickly, "Mr. Alex, this lady served the previous master of the palace. She has not been back in some time. It seems she's now here to see you." Alex was stunned. He quickly bowed to her, sure that she could sense the gesture even if she couldn't see it, and helped her to sit. "I'm so sorry you didn't get to see Georgina before she passed." 2 tears trickled from the blind woman's eyes. "It is too bad, but it is out of our hands." Alex felt very sad. He began to tell her the story of Georgina's last days, and together they cried over what had been lost. When the other disciples saw them sitting together, they felt great sadness as well. This simple act of kindness gave the old woman an excellent opinion of Alex. Although she had pledged to serve the Moon Palace in general, no matter who was in charge, she had been deeply loyal to Georgina. Knowing that Alex had clearly held a great deal of love and respect for Georgina as well, made her feel that the palace had been passed into safe hands. "Please follow me," she said. She began walking quickly out of the palace, Alex following close behind her. Behind them, the mountains rose up around the palace, obscured somewhat by the trees by the path. Although she was blind, she was very familiar with the area surrounding the palace. She walked quickly, and Alex did his best to keep up with her. Halfway up one of the mountains, she pressed her hand to the stones and revealed a cave. This was a secret extension of the Moon Palace. The walls of the cave were covered with old drawings and shapes on the stones. Alex slowed his steps to look at them one by one, and began to recognize them as diagrams of martial arts movements. With a little patience, he was easily able to understand the techniques on display. "All the masters of the Moon Palace must come here to train," the old woman said. "I come twice a year. That is all that is allowed. Over the years, your power will grow." Alex understood instantly that this was an exclusive part of the palace not meant for the eyes of the other disciples. He doubted any of them even knew the place existed. Episode 377, A Growing Legacy. Alex turned and bowed to the old woman again, humbly offering his thanks. "You don't have to thank me," she said, her little face filling with joy. "This is a place for all the masters, and you are the master of the Moon Palace now. It is my duty to show you this." After that, Alex returned every day to study and discuss the techniques with the old woman. Without his even noticing it, his skills improved rapidly. The more he practiced, the more he realized he didn't know. There was far more to learn here than anything he could cram into his brain in just a few weeks. But the old woman knew a great deal about the history of the palace and the martial arts form, and helped him when he ran into roadblocks. She knew how to put complicated concepts into simple terms. Every time he left a cave, he struggled to remember what the figures on the walls looked like. He knew it would take a long time for him to really understand what he was learning. When he returned to the palace, Celeste suddenly exclaimed, "Your face! You look different." She held up a mirror for him to see for himself. He realized she was right. His skin had become much smoother, and his hair was glossy. He looked the very picture of health. He realized this must be a side effect of his mysterious new course of study. He had a sudden mischievous thought that it was strange that studying in the cave was making him look so good when the old woman looked so weathered and ugly. But he knew he would never dare to ask her why that was. At that moment, a disciple walked in, followed closely by a man shouting, "Alex! I'm looking for Alex!" It was Rufus. His hair and clothes were a mess. Alex realized the disciples must have given him a very hard time at the gate. Strange men were not usually permitted to enter, and the disciples tended to be cold towards strangers. Rufus quickly explained the situation with Debbie. Alex packed as quickly as he could and jumped into Rufus's car. News of the impending martial arts war swept across the United States. People heard there was a conflict between Tyson, the leader of the Blood Brothers, and some strange newcomer. Some martial arts groups were very eager to watch the conflict from a distance, hoping to learn and become stronger through their fight. Everyone knew the history of the Blood Brothers. But as the years had gone by, they had assumed that the gang had finally left their anger at the rest of the martial arts community in the past. Now, they were active and attacking again. But Alex was a mystery. There were plenty of rumors and stories flying about, but little was really known about the new Lord of the Moon Palace. Most of the other groups hoped he was powerful. They didn't want to intervene if they didn't have to, and it was convenient to assume he could take care of himself. But they also knew that if Alex fell, the Blood Brothers would continue to rise in power, demanding respect and even tribute from the other groups. No one wanted to be dragged into the conflict. Along the Hudson River, tourists were visiting the scattered waterfalls and reserves despite the cold weather to see the magnificent natural formations along the water. The tourist traps all along the Hudson River were bustling and crowded. Despite the crowds who came and went, Tyson had set up camp to wait for Alex to come and challenge him. Despite the cold, he wore light clothes, always ready for a fight. His face betrayed no feelings. He always looked stern and resolute. Rumors began to spread, and people started to avoid the sight. But other martial artists came to challenge his followers. The Blood Brothers had no problem defeating them all. One, a student named Jack, saw many of them personally and began to make a name for himself. Sometimes he fought them at the river, where they had come to challenge Tyson, and sometimes he went to their own schools and beat them there. News of his power began to spread. None of this seemed to move or interest Tyson. Privately, he thought it was good for Jack to become notorious on his own. Rumors of the Blood Brothers' downfall had begun to spread when Alex defeated Lee Harshaw. Jack's success was a way of showing the world that the Blood Brothers would continue to produce fighters, even better fighters than what they had before. Losing Lee would not destroy them. But Tyson was becoming impatient as he waited for Alex. When he had received the challenge, he had been ready to fight immediately. But now he had been waiting at the river for weeks, and there was no sign of Alex. The delay was hurting Alex more than himself. The longer he didn't show up, the more the other martial arts groups began to doubt he had ever been a great fighter in the first place. Those who had wondered if they could learn something from the newcomer began to laugh at him. No one regarded him as a threat or a new master anymore. They sighed to each other that the story was over before it had even begun. A few disciples from different schools sat together at a coffee shop near the river discussing the situation. I heard Tyson attacked Alex's girlfriend with a show of his internal force, and she's wasting away. But Alex hasn't shown up to do anything about it. I'm amazed," said one disciple. "Being famous is tough. Alex must have chickened out when he realized what Tyson could do," said another. "Are you kidding me? He just showed up on the scene and now he disappears?" cried another. Meanwhile, Jessup was still desperately trying to save Debbie's life. He invited over 10 medical experts to weigh in on the situation, but none of them could see a solution. Each one sadly encouraged him to give up and let her slip away peacefully. Episode 378, Last Moments. It seemed that there was nothing in the world of medicine that could fight the power of Tyson's internal force, freezing Debbie to death. A group of doctors approached Jessup with melancholy expressions. The leader of their group stepped forward to speak. "She seems to be in a better state today," he said hesitantly. "But we don't think this is good news. Patients often improve right before the end. This could be it." Jessup felt as if his heart would break, but he pulled himself together to bravely say, "You have all worked so hard. Thank you." He shook the leader's hand. But at that moment, Alex burst into the hospital wing, followed closely by Rufus. They rushed wordlessly past Jessup in to see Debbie. She looked terrible, thin and haggard. She was so pale it was as if frost was collecting on her skin. Her eyes were still lovely, but they had lost their sparkle. She lay listlessly on the bed with her eyes open. She didn't seem to hear Alex or recognize his voice. She stared ahead as if stuck in a trance. Tears poured down Alex's face. If he had known how much Debbie was suffering in his absence, he never would have disappeared to continue his martial arts training. Debbie, can you hear me?" He took her hand in his, wincing at how cold her fingers felt. Jessup had followed them into the room and stood to the side. "Debbie," he called softly, "look who's here. Don't you recognize him?" Alex felt as if he was being stabbed in the heart. But Jessup's voice seemed to get through to Debbie. She turned her head slowly. When she saw Alex's face, she began to turn away. "I don't want you to see me like this," she murmured. Please leave." Jessup was shocked that this was the first thing it occurred to her to say. "Please, don't be like that, Debbie," Alex begged her. "Of course I want to see you. No matter what, you're the most beautiful woman alive." Debbie began shivering fitfully. Tears flowed down her face. "I'm so happy I met you," she said softly. "But I can't hold on anymore. I think I would be gone by now if I didn't love you so much, if I hadn't been so desperate to see you one more time." "It's my fault," Alex said fiercely. "I brought this on you. I should have protected you." He wrapped her in his arms and cried like a child. Jessup watched the pair helplessly, overwhelmed by their grief. Debbie shook her head. "I don't blame you. It's not your fault." That made Alex cry even harder. He thought of everything they had been through, everything they had overcome to be together. He couldn't believe he was about to lose her. Nurses gathered shyly by the door, struck by the sight of such a handsome man crying at his beloved's bedside. Alex realized he didn't care how many people saw him cry. He wondered if he would ever stop. Jessup and the nurses all exchanged looks with one another. They had all heard what the doctors had said. These might be Debbie's last moments alive. If she really was holding out in order to see Alex one more time, she might not last much longer. Suddenly, Alex's calm voice cut through the room as he said, "Tell them I will fight with Tyson in 3 days." Jessup gaped at him in disbelief. "You all can go," Alex continued in an emotionless voice. "Sir, we can't leave the patient. We need to keep monitoring her," a nurse told him gently, even as her heart broke for their situation. "Get out of here." Alex's tone was still flat, but the force in his voice pushed them all to back away slowly. With bowed heads, they retreated. Now that they were alone, Alex finally felt like he could concentrate. He scoured his mind, reviewing everything he had learned to find something to help Debbie. He cast his thoughts back to the wall of the cave near the Moon Palace. After a few tense moments, Alex reached out and touched her forehead. An air as warm and sweet as new sunlight in spring flushed through Debbie's body, chasing away the cold. She gasped incredulously at the sudden rush of warmth. "Oh, Alex! I'm in such a state. You'll never like me again," she said with tears in her eyes. Alex smiled at her through his own tears. "You're being silly. I'll always love you." His feelings of regret and self-blame began to recede. He had felt horribly irresponsible and careless for leaving Debbie vulnerable to attack. But maybe it had been worth it to learn this new knowledge, so he could use it to protect her from attack. Maybe it had all worked out exactly the way it was supposed to. Debbie's eyes went a little hazy, and she said nonsensically, "You look different. How did you become more handsome? You were already so handsome before." It made no difference to her, of course. Even if he had returned to her in the ugliest state, she would still be happy to be in his arms. Alex laughed a little. "You look more beautiful too. And you'll look even better once you have a chance to rest and recover." He was sweating a little from the effort of warming her with his internal power. Although his new powers were strong, they were still new. As he had realized before, it would take a long time to fully master his abilities. Debbie smiled, but it turned into a wince. Although the warmth Alex lent her was a welcome relief, the icy freeze of Tyson's internal power still warred within her, giving her alternating hot and cold flashes. "I can die happy seeing you here with me." "You're not dying," said Alex, clenching his teeth. He could also feel Tyson's power fighting against his own and shivering as a wave of cold hit him. "You're going to live with me for a long time." But Debbie watched with alarm as Alex's face turned pale. His lips began to turn blue. He was trying to take on more of Tyson's power, but that meant accepting more of the damage in his own body as well. Alex, let go," Debbie begged him. She hated to see him suffer the way she had before. She tried to push his hand away, but it was clenched tight, almost frozen in position. She struggled as hard as she could, but nothing seemed to help. Episode 379, Rebirth. The martial art Alex was using to help Debbie is often called a pounding medicine. The name came from a legend about an old practitioner pounding herbs on a rock under a full moon. It was a tender power, as gentle as a slow-running creek in spring. As much as he wanted to fight the power hurting Debbie with something strong like fire, that was not how this art worked. This power worked best when it was allowed to work gently. Alex had a picture of the ancient practitioner in his mind. But as he focused on the image, the picture transformed. Instead of the battle-hardened martial artist he had imagined before, in his mind's eye, he saw a young girl grinding the herbs on a rock. She had a sorrowful, tender expression on her face, but she moved with determination, never faltering no matter how hard she worked. He realized he was looking at the creator of the art he was currently trying to use. The power he was tapping into now came from the Moon Palace itself. It was a deep power infused into the heart and soul of the place, strengthened by years of dedication and hard work from disciples. But that was not all that made the power of the Moon Palace strong. It was love. The blind old woman who had come to show him the cave had spoken about this. She had spoken of how the original founder of the moon cult had been separated from her lover by her parents, forced to go another way. They had each studied hard and created their own practices, attracting students and forming a long-lasting tradition of martial arts. But neither had been able to fully let go of that first love they had shared. They had channeled that love into their studies instead. Every move, every technique, every shred of wisdom was founded on deep and unfulfilled love. Alex suddenly felt a deep connection to every previous master of the moon cult who had studied and trained and practiced in the centuries before him. Each of them had used their love as a source of power. He realized his love for Debbie had always given him great power, even when he hadn't realized it. He knew he would move heaven and earth for her. In many small ways, in the past he already had, even before he had come to understand martial arts or begin training. Even before he had the love of the Moon Palace to draw upon, he had drawn upon his own love for Debbie. But he hadn't always felt confident that things would work out. He had been his most powerful when he had felt that there was no other choice and no chance of success, but had tried his hardest to win her anyway. He felt as if all the previous masters were watching him fight for Debbie, willing to find the answer. He realized he had spent precious energy fighting Tyson's internal force at work in Debbie, as if throwing burning matches at a blizzard. He suddenly understood this was not how they would win. He took a deep breath and settled into himself, into the knowledge that he would never abandon Debbie, even if his efforts seemed doomed to failure. He felt the cold creeping upon him and chose not to be afraid. He let himself feel tired, as if the last of his strength was being drained. But as what he thought of as his true strength drained away, he felt filled with something else. A new aura, unfamiliar to him, yet utterly powerful. In the end, he had felt certain was coming for him, and Debbie did not come. Instead, something like a strong summer breeze surged through him, chased by a wildfire. As the energy coursed through him, Alex realized that he had come to a new understanding of himself and of what he thought of as power. He felt as if he had passed some strange test set by death and come out immortal. He took several deep breaths, tasting his new power. Wisps of his aura emanated from his fingers, still pressed against Debbie's forehead, and began to seep into her skin, chasing the cold away. His palms grew warmer and warmer, and he began to gently share his energy with Debbie, letting her feel the thrill of this new power the same way he had. It took Debbie several moments to notice the change. She was still filled with fear and cold. She had been fighting Tyson's attack for so many days that she felt numb to change. But slowly, she began to notice that she was feeling comfortable and warm, as if floating on the gentle waves of a lovely sea. She felt soft from head to toe. She imagined waves cresting over her head, washing away frost and mud and fear. She felt filled with an incredible spirit that relaxed her muscles even as it strengthened them, and made her skin feel clean and bright. Filled with this energy, she became even more beautiful than she already had been before. With a soft, satisfied sigh, Alex let his hand fall. His eyes scanned her face, her hands and her eyes, making sure that she was well. She looked back at him, calm and peaceful and serene. It had worked. Episode 380, Anticipation or Love. While Alex and Debbie enjoyed this private revelation, the news of Alex's impending fight with Tyson exploded from the information channels of the Clifton family. Word spread beyond even the U.S. to the martial arts communities of the entire world. Alex will fight a world-class martial arts master in a decisive battle in 3 days. Rumors and stories and speculation flew in every direction. As far as most people knew, Alex was only a humble security guard. Some whispered that he was actually a famous martial arts master, but had only been keeping a low profile because he enjoyed his privacy. But even those who believed him to have some skill did not believe he would be much of a match for someone as powerful as Tyson, the leader of the Blood Brothers. The world waited in breathless anticipation as 3 days passed. Tourists continued to flock to the Hudson River, hiking through the paths to see the waterfalls scattered along its length, taking part in river cruises, or even just staying in nearby hotels to eat at restaurants in the area. Even though it was the off-season, the entire place was bustling with activity. Many of the visitors knew of the upcoming match, and it only added to the Hudson River's attractions for them. In one of the clusters of tourist attractions nearby, a beautiful girl walked down the road with a grim expression. She was beautifully dressed and graceful, as noble as a little princess. It was Kelly Phillips, walking arm in arm with her friend Sharon. Kelly hadn't seen Alex since the incident with his Ferrari in Washington, D.C. "Come on," Sharon whined. "Quit moping around." Kelly blushed. She was generally a bit reserved with her thoughts, and didn't like it when people could guess what she was feeling. Sharon rolled her eyes. "I've already guessed why we're here. You came all this way to watch the martial arts competition. But Alex hasn't shown up this whole month. I don't think the new announcement about the match is even true. We should go back. Stop listening to rumors." "Alex always keeps his word," Kelly said stubbornly. Despite her melancholy, she smiled a little as she said this. "If he really comes, he'll fight. I want to see it." "Do you think he'll win?" Sharon teased her. This made Kelly frown again. She had a lot of romantic ideas for how she might accidentally bump into Alex when he turned up. But she hadn't imagined what would happen if he got injured in the fight. The thought made her heart pound with fear. "Alex has some skills, but I don't know what to expect from him," Sharon thought out loud. "Maybe he just wants to meet some of these guys." They spotted a nearby restaurant and decided to stop for a meal. The place was very crowded. People had come from all over to explore the Hudson River and its many attractions. The restaurant was noisy with the sound of many different U.S. accents competing with one another to be heard. Sharon and Kelly waited for a long time, but finally, The staff admitted that there would not be a free table for some time. However, they were welcome to share a larger table if they didn't mind sitting with strangers. Sharon was a little reluctant, but Kelly shrugged and said it was fine. Next to them, others were discussing the match. "But who do you think will win?" a domineering lady asked. She wore furs and bright lipstick and had the natural air of someone accustomed to being listened to and obeyed. "It has to be Alex. Why not?" the girl next to her said firmly. She seemed as if she might be related to the domineering lady, or at least a relation through marriage. Sharon thought with amusement that she might be the daughter-in-law of the older woman. But Kelly looked at her with some surprise. She realized suddenly that she knew the girl. The domineering woman turned to them and demanded, "And you? Who do you think will win?" Kelly had not planned on starting a conversation with whoever they ended up sharing their table with, but the domineering woman was difficult to ignore. "Alex, I think." Sharon chimed in to agree. The lady scoffed. "Don't you children know anything about martial arts? About the man Alex has challenged? He can't possibly win." "Why do you say that?" the young woman with her cried. "Who says Alex can't win?" She looked to Kelly and Sharon for support, but when she looked Kelly full in the face, she gasped in surprise. "Kelly? Is that you?" Kelly raised her eyebrows. "Rose?" In one voice, they asked each other, "What are you doing here?" "I'm here to support Alex, of course," Rose said a little defensively. She was very proud to know Alex. "Groupies," the domineering lady sighed. "So, you're all here to support the same man. Well, it'll end in tears." Her words attracted the attention of another girl. She was plainly dressed but carried herself with a noble air. She frowned and said, "Please, watch what you say. I've placed a pretty large bet on Alex." Her words caused more of the diners to glance at her in surprise. Kelly looked her up and down. She was very beautiful, though she looked a little melancholy. Kelly thought they must look very similar. The girl was Lindsay Marvel. She had traveled out to support Alex as soon as she heard the news about the match back in D.C. The domineering lady scoffed again. "How many rich young ladies have traveled out this way just to support that boy?" But she decided not to make any further issue of it. Rose gave Kelly a knowing look. "Kelly, I told you Alex likes me. Didn't you believe me?" she said. "I never said I didn't believe you," Kelly said slowly. "I just came because I want to support him. I didn't know what had happened to him, and I don't know anything about your relationship with him." "You liar!" Rose crowed. "It's so obvious you're still in love with him." She spoke loudly and a bit obnoxiously, but it was only to cover how worried she suddenly was. It hadn't occurred to her that there would be other girls here to support Alex too. It seemed like they were at a table full of young women in love with Alex. Rose was not amused. Kelly blushed. "Please lower your voice. I'm just his friend, that's all." Rose adjusted her expression to look sweet and inviting. "Well, of course. Alex is so wonderful. Lots of people like him, right?" She turned and flashed a big smile at Lindsay. "Tell me how you met him. Let's all share our stories. It'll be so fun." She could tell her friendly approach had Kelly flustered. The smile Lindsay gave her was a little more reserved. Lindsay considered herself to be a bit more mature and wasn't as interested in playing silly games. But Rose chatted quickly and brightly, and eventually she got the other two girls to loosen up a little. At a nearby table, another girl with a plainer face and a more ordinary figure watched them with a menacing look on her face. "Groupies," she muttered, echoing the domineering lady from before. "Why are you acting as if you all know him so well, huh?"
Thank you for listening to Crown TV. Please don't forget to subscribe, share and turn on the notification button.